Good morning, everybody. Good to be with you all, and I'm excited. This has been a really fun way of spending these times during Lent. Who knew that you could have so much fun talking about death? Turns out you can.
It's a relative term.
Well, sure, right. Faithful living, faithful dying. We've had several sessions. We've had several ways of navigating some of this material. And what felt really important as we did our planning was to have some time to talk about some of the practical questions. Okay, so here's sort of theologically how to integrate our contemplations of death into our life and into our faith. But now, what are the practical questions, and how does that actually integration actually happen? So for that, I'm very excited to be talking with Liz Nielsen. Thank you for being here, Liz.
Yes, my pleasure.
I mentioned earlier that I told them, I didn't tell you, but that I found you on A Woman to Watch from Austin Woman magazine. And here's what the little blurb there says. Liz Nielsen is the founder and CEO of Nielsen Law, PLLC. She has guided hundreds of families through the estate planning process, serving as their trusted advisor to bring peace of mind to their lives. As a wife, mother, and business owner, she understands how overwhelming an estate plan can feel. As an attorney, she knows how important it is to have that plan in place. Nielsen is board certified in estate planning and probate law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization and practices exclusively in the areas of estate planning, special needs planning, and estate administration. Giving back to the Austin community is very important to Nielsen, and she currently serves as president of the Travis County Women Lawyers Association and vice chair of AGE of Central Texas. That's Liz. Thank you for being here with us, Liz. Yeah, right? Maybe just to begin our conversation, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got started in this line of work.
Sure. Well, I think I'm going to go back to when I was in law school. So no one goes to law school thinking that they're going to do estate planning and probate. You know, I was like 23 years old. Like that was just not what I was thinking. But in law school, I took a course on wills and estates with a really fantastic professor, Stanley Johansson. He wrote the Texas Estates Code and was just a really great, engaging professor. But while I was taking that course, my grandmother had been diagnosed with dementia, and so I was also helping my grandfather kind of navigate that journey, figuring out how to make decisions for her, how they could sell their house without her being able to sign the deed, sort of all of those practicalities of estate planning, and really seeing the role that the estate planning attorney plays in helping families plan for, but then also through these kind of more difficult times. And so kind of, being able to see both the practical side with my family, but then also the legal side, and just seeing how interesting it was and how the cases are really interesting and the laws are interesting. Seeing both sides, I was like, wow, this might be what I want to do. And then, throughout the course of law school, getting to take classes in tax and contracts and seeing that, oh, this is actually what I'm interested in much more than litigation and being in the courtroom, like what I thought I was going to do. And so I figured out by the end of law school, yes, I want to do estate planning. I graduated from law school in 2009, which was the beginning of the recession. Wasn't able to go straight into estate planning, but actually started with working in-house at a big nonprofit for 4 years, which has also really helped my estate planning practice, since I help a lot of families with charitable giving and working with nonprofits. And so now, I started in estate planning in 2012, and I've loved it. I started my firm about 8 years ago. It's now me, 3 other lawyers, and really all that we do is estate planning and probate. And I truly think it's the best area of law. I love what I do. I love how I get to help families. I also do get to go to court, actually, because when we do probate, we go to court. So I go to court at least a few times a month. And so it's really a great combination of everything that I love, but also truly helping people.
I don't know that I've ever interviewed someone who says, it's great because I get to go to court a few times a month. That's new for me.
I always win because I know what's going to happen. So.
You're like the Thomas J. Henry of estate planning.
Hardly. No big airplanes for me.
Okay, all right. Well. I was watching for like helicopters out in the parking lot. How's she going to come in? I don't know if we've got a landing spot out there.
Are you sure you're doing it right?
Maybe not. Maybe I went in. I think I did go into the wrong area of law for making that much money.
Yeah, so, Liz, one of the things I mentioned in your biography, and I'm imagining that you're, you're beginning from your work with your grandmother, and then the families that you've worked with has influenced your work with Age of Central Texas. Mm-hmm. And I want to hear more about that. The first thing that I want, though, to say to you all is that when I have guests that come in from outside the church, we have an honorarium that we offer the guests. When I have guests from inside the church, I figure it's part of your giving to the church. But when I have guests from outside, I offer an honorarium. Liz asked that her honorarium be a donation to Age of Central Texas. So thank you for that, by the way, and for giving us that opportunity, which we followed through on. We've sent a $200 donation to Age of Central Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, yeah. Can you say maybe just a word or two about what you do with them and who they are and what you do with them?
Yeah, and that article that you read was from, I guess, a couple of years ago, because I'm currently the president of Age of Central Texas, president of the board. And what Age does is it really helps older adults and their caregivers thrive through the aging journey. And so they do a lot of really wonderful work, including having support groups for caregivers, and they have those in person and online, because recognizing that caregivers often cannot leave the person that they are caregiving for. They have a lot of conferences focused on kind of different areas of the caregiving journey, and then they run adult day centers, which is like adult daycare, where they accept people of kind of all income ranges, which is really unusual for those facilities. They're really the only one here in Central Texas that accepts Medicaid and VA benefits, as well as private pay. And so really great. They have a location actually not too far from here in Round Rock, and it's really wonderful because it allows caregivers to continue to work or go to the grocery store and be able to do those things that they have to do while also caregiving for a loved one with dementia or memory loss or other reasons that they need a little bit additional support and can't be left at home by themselves.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
It's called Age of Central Texas. It's AGE, and they have the adult day facilities, one up in Round Rock and then one in South Austin by South Park Meadows. No, so they used to have one in Central Austin, but most of the people that were using the facility were not living in that neighborhood anymore, and so they have moved from that facility. We have a new administrative office that is still not very far from there, but in a newer building that's less expensive. We are technically located there, but we're leasing back for a few months, but not for long. Yeah, it's still there for now. That reminds me of another thing, though, that I think Age does that a lot of people don't realize is they have a health equipment lending library, which is something that brings people to our facilities. And it's amazing. So if you need a knee scooter or crutches or something, it's open to anybody. It's really a great way to reduce waste, right? Because a lot of that durable medical equipment isn't reused, but also a way for anybody of any income level to get those. Yes, we take donations, and so if you have some of that sitting in your garage, especially like wheelchairs are a huge need, working wheelchairs, but any of that, and then they also give out adult incontinence items like adult diapers, which are really expensive. You think about how much expensive diapers are for children, even more for adults, and so I think it's in May, we do it's called the Dignity Drive, where we collect that donations.
This year with Congregational Health, we'll be
Oh,
for St. Julian's.
wonderful! Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah, so it's really a wonderful opportunity to give back, But yeah, also a great resource for the community.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that, for that work that you're doing. In your work with families, you talked about all the work that you've done with families and how meaningful that is. What is something that you wish people knew before they went and met with an estate planning attorney?
Okay, so I guess there's a lot of things I wish people knew. So when people think about estate planning, they usually will think about like a will or maybe a trust, what happens to their stuff after they pass away. And that's really important, right? Thinking about what you want to have happen to your things, your money. But I think some of the things that people don't think about are, number one is like incapacity planning. Like I mentioned, my grandmother, right? She was incapacitated for like 9 years. So this period of incapacity can last for a very long time, and you're alive, right? You're experiencing it. And so I think it's really important to think about who's going to make decisions while you're incapacitated, what decisions you want them to make. There's this really great resource. I actually learned about it from Hospice Austin. I think maybe y'all had come in and speak here, but it's called theconversationproject.org. They have a really great website with sort of guides for how to talk to your family members about decision making, both for medical decisions, financial decisions, where you might want to live. Do you want to stay in your home for as long as possible, or are you okay with moving to assisted living at some point? Sort of what are your wishes, and then how to have those really difficult conversations with your family, but those conversations that are so important. And so that incapacity planning component, I think a lot of times people don't realize is such a key part of estate planning. And then kind of hand in hand with that, estate planning really can't be done in a vacuum. It can't be done just in that room with me and the family I'm working with. It has to be done with also talking to their children, their other loved ones, the people that they've put in those decision-making positions. And so a lot of times we'll do something, we call it a family meeting, and we'll do it at the end of the estate planning process. This isn't asking permission. This is more sharing information and having the conversation about, what is kind of general overview of the plan, what are the different fiduciary roles, right? Who do you have making medical decisions? Who do you have making financial decisions? Who do you have listed as the executor? And then what are those roles so they kind of know? And then I also have a checklist that I go through with families of sort of just things to talk about, right? Like, where are your bank accounts, right? They don't even know how much money is in the bank account, because who knows how much money you're going to have at that point. But where is that bank? Really helpful. Do you have a safe deposit box? Where do you keep your passwords? Who is your doctor? Sort of, there's all these things I think it's really helpful to talk to your family about that isn't necessarily like the will, but it all kind of goes hand in hand with the estate planning. And I find that estate plans work so much better when people have had that conversation with their adult children, their other loved ones who they have included in the plan. And so I think having that conversation with your family and not just sitting in the room with the estate planning attorney and just signing the documents, like that's just not quite enough. Yeah, honestly.
Yeah. The one of the you know that my work is in theology, and a big part of what we're doing is sort of theological reflection about living and dying together. And part of the reason for that is, I think culturally we tend to separate them. Like, well, we're not dying right now, so let's just talk about living. There'll be a time later to talk about that. And we sort of try to join them up, for one thing, just to say, hey, death is a part of life. It's a part of family life. And it's also a part of our faith, how we relate to it. And I mean, the whole thing about Easter is we don't have to be afraid of it. Like this, Paul says, death has been overcome in Christ. And so part of our faith is there's even a tradition of laughing at death. Like Easter is a kind of, we have a former bishop who used to like to start each Easter sermon by telling a joke. And she said, that's theologically important. It's time to laugh, We went through Lent, and now it's time to say, death, ha, So I wonder if you have, I'm imagining that you have people who are really reluctant to think about death in the midst of life. And if so, like, how do you handle that in your work?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, there are people who feel maybe a little superstitious talking about death or just uncomfortable with it. I mean, maybe most of us are uncomfortable with it. But I also find that it's so much, I don't know, we make much better decisions when we're thinking about it before it's an emergency, before there's that cancer diagnosis or whatever. It's much easier to make good, rational decisions about it when you're planning in advance. And I also think it gives people kind of that peace of mind that, if something does happen, you're able to spend that time with your family. You're able to do the things that you love as opposed to coming and meeting with the estate planning attorney, which is probably not the thing that you're going to love doing the most. And so I think really planning ahead and having those conversations ahead of time, I mean, it's really a gift to your family to have done this planning ahead of time, and a gift to your spouse to have already gone through that planning process. And so it doesn't become this emergency at the end.
One of the things that I imagine also can happen, this is testimony time, this is sort of my experience with myself, like, okay, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to do some end-of-life planning. Ooh, that's done, put it on the shelf. Now the next thing is when my family has to pull it out.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, I think you're probably going to tell me that's not enough, and probably this is something that should be pulled off and looked at and reviewed. Is that, like, talk to us about that. Is that?
I mean, I think that's exactly right. It's not just sort of something that you do one time and you put it on the shelf and you never think about it again. I think things change, right? Your family changes, your children get older, people get divorced. I mean, things happen, right? And so I think it is important to pull it out and look at it. Laws change as well, so that's also something to consider. But really, it's usually more things change within your family or with your assets. And so I think looking at it, I usually recommend looking at it at least every 2 or 3 years, ideally maybe once a year, pulling it out and just looking at sort of the overall structure. Like, are those people you have listed, are they the right people? Are they still capable of serving in those roles? And so I do think it's important to pull it out. There's, obviously if you move to another state, that's another time when it's really important to look at it and update it, because the laws are very state specific for estate planning, especially for the incapacity documents, the medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney. Those are state specific documents. But yeah, I think it is important to pull it out, take a look at it, and you very well, right, you can go 5 or 10 years where you're pulling it out, you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, it's still good, and that's great. But then usually eventually something changes. And going through that process of looking at it, also thinking about like beneficiary designations on like retirement and life insurance, making sure those are kept up to date. This is testimony time as well. When I was a young estate planning attorney, I did my own estate plan, and I went and looked at like the beneficiaries that I had on my bank accounts, and lo and behold, I had my brother listed on almost all of the accounts because I had done my estate planning before I got married. But whatever's on those beneficiary designations is what happened. So if I had passed away, like, my husband would not have gotten my assets. It would have gone to my brother, who also wasn't very responsible at the time. So it was not the right choice. So again, I think looking at it, and not just looking at like what you have in your will, but also those beneficiary designations is really important.
Yeah. One more question I have for you, and then I'm imagining that folks have some questions, detailed questions, practical questions, and I think I'm going to give them plenty of time. And then I've got an idea about how to end if we have time. What I'd love to do is take a walk outside down to our columbarium, which is just down the steps out here, and conclude our this season. These conversations about living and dying in the company of those who we have lost, in the company of those who have already died, and end with a prayer down there. So I'll watch the time. If we really get into it deep here, then know that was an idea, and we won't follow through. But we'll see how we're doing. My final question for you is simply next steps. Like, what do you recommend as we leave here today? What's a thought or even something we can write down as an intention to do?
Okay, so I'll start with something just really practical that y'all could do, maybe even like pulling out your iPhones right now, is go and name a legacy contact for your Apple accounts or your Google accounts. It's really easy to do. Like on your iPhone, you can just search, for legacy contact, and it will come up. Really do it. Those accounts are really, really hard to access after someone passes away, almost impossible. And so do that,
Wow.
have your parents do that, have your adult children do that. It's really easy and makes a huge difference. And it's easy, I know it's easy to do for
Legacy
Apple, Google, and like Meta, like Facebook, but any other, accounts that you use, there's usually a way to name like a legacy contact or a successor manager, and it's really, really helpful.
My uncle just died. My uncle just died, and my aunt and his children had to just wipe his computer. They couldn't get into anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, yeah. And then you have others to list too, but we can see what those,
Oh, yes, oh. Please.
Oh.
Do you want to say?
Do you have anything else? Yes,
more
I
for our
think,
to-do list?
so obviously making sure you have an estate plan. I think y'all are working on maybe doing that here, which is great. I think sometimes people find when they go through and they do it online, like with LegalZoom, or is it Giving? I don't know what y'all have. Anyways, whatever online system, you might find that, this doesn't quite work for my family, or I have questions. That's the time to go talk to an attorney. I also see the biggest difficulty with the online forms is they're often not signed correctly. And so just making sure you always sign a will in front of 2 witnesses and a notary all at the same time, being really careful to fill in all the blanks. And if you pull out your old will and you notice that someone didn't write in a name or something, then that's the time to update, because it's a really big deal to have it signed correctly. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just, we've done our will, and of course we thought, okay, we're done with it. Of course, we're not. But one of the things that hits me as just thinking about estate planning is it sounds really not complicated, but complex. And this is probably overthinking, but I start going into how many scenarios do we have to plan around? I've got dementia, she's sick. All these, is it, kind of every scenario, and you really ought to go through and think through all those different things?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. I mean, absolutely. So, and that's sort of like my job, right? My job is to think about all of the things that could go wrong in all of the various scenarios. But yes, I think that is important. Especially, I mean, it can be as simple, right, as just making sure you name lots of backups for all of the, your medical power of attorney. Like name 2 or 3 backups. Don't just name your spouse. And so that can really help, and that goes a long way towards planning for all of those different contingencies. But I spend a lot of time talking to my families. Okay, well, what happens if your daughter passes away before you? What if she has kids? What if she doesn't have kids? How much flexibility do you want to give her in the planning that she can do? And so we really do think through. But the good news is, like, an attorney like me, we can help guide you through those conversations and think through it, and tell you what maybe we've seen other families do can be really helpful too. Yeah.
Thank you. You've spoken a lot about wills. Can you tell me the difference between a will and a trust?
I sure can. Yeah. So, and I should have.
First question on the bar exam.
And I should say that I'm supposed to say this at the very beginning, and I didn't. But whatever I tell you, this is just education. No specific legal advice is being given. But happy to tell you. All right, so the difference between a will and a trust. So basically, a will and a trust, they do the same thing as far as saying what happens to your assets after you pass away. And the type of trust I'm talking about, back up there, is what's called a revocable living trust. And this is the main type of trust that me and every estate planning attorney sets up. So the will and the trust, they do the same thing as far as saying what happens after you pass away. The big difference is that the will doesn't go into effect until you've died, and someone's taken that will to the probate court, and the judge has said, yes, that is a valid will, and we're naming whoever as the independent executor. And so the will only goes into effect. You're dead, someone's taken it to the probate court. The trust, on the other hand, it goes into effect as soon as you sign it. That's why we call it a living trust. It goes into effect while you're alive. It can help plan for how your assets are managed, both if you become incapacitated as well as if you pass away. And I think in Texas, the biggest benefit of a revocable trust is planning for incapacity. It's the best way to manage your financial accounts, like your bank account, your brokerage account, your real estate, if you become incapacitated. The other kind of benefits to the revocable trust is it can make things a little bit easier after you pass away. Anything owned by that trust when you pass away doesn't have to go through probate court, can be accessed pretty quickly by your spouse or successor trustee, whoever you have named. It also, it can avoid probate. A lot of times here in Texas, we find that not all assets are owned by the trust, but also probate's not that big of a deal here in Texas. You hear all these horror stories about probate, and some of them are maybe true, but in Texas, for most people, probate is a pretty straightforward process. It takes a few months. It costs, $5,000 or $10,000. It's not the end of the world, unlike like in California or New York or Florida. You hear all these horror stories about probate there. It takes years. It costs, you get the lawyers there. This is where, maybe if I was Thomas J. Henry, I'd move to California because the attorneys get paid a percentage of the assets of the estate. And it's like a pretty big percentage. So that would be nice if I was getting, 1% of a $10 million estate or $12 billion estate. Eventually, I would have my own airplane. But here in Texas, that's, or a helicopter, or both.
You're leaving Texas after this, aren't you?
But here in Texas, probate's not that big of a deal. Yes?
Hopefully this is a quick question. I'm just curious. If you wanted a trust fund to help pay, because I'm 65, and so if I sell my house and put a bunch of money in trust fund to pay for me being living, assisted living, but what if I want part of that to also be saved for my niece to go to college? Would that be two separate trusts or all the same trust? And I know you don't have to give me a detail. I'm just curious if it would.
Yeah, so it depends, right? So there's different ways to save for college. So one thing that sometimes people will do is contribute to like a 529 account for education for their children, niece, nephew, whoever. You can set up a 529 account. And that's sort of a way, and that's basically a college savings account, and then you can put money in there, and then it can grow tax-free, and then it has to be used for that. It has to be used for education for the most part, either for your niece or your niece's children if your niece doesn't use it all. So it can be a really good way to contribute to college education without having to set up a separate trust fund, which is complicated, I would say.
Matthew, did you?
I guess, Ms. May, I missed the beginning, so maybe you already talked about this, but do you do a will and a living trust? Or do you just choose
Good
one?
question.
And should you, is there a recommendation, which I know you can't legally give?
Yeah. So with the will or trust, you have the base estate plan is based on either the will or the trust. But if you have a trust-based plan, you still have a backup will. We call it a pour-over will, where the only beneficiary of the will is the trust. So even with the trust, you still have that backup will. And that's because sometimes, like my grandmother, she had a separate account that she had in her individual name because it was for like inheritance from her parents. And it had like $70,000 in it. But she never put it in their revocable trust. And so we had to use this pour-over will to get that money moved into the trust. And so we always have that backup will. We still have to go through probate for it if there's assets outside of the trust. But again, probate's not that big of a deal. That one was really easy. It was up in Dallas County, and I went with my grandfather to court. And we were done with the hearing before my mom was even able to park the car. So.
So when Tony introduced you, he mentioned special needs. Because I have a friend who's my age who has a younger brother that's got diminished mental capacity his whole life, and she's trying to figure out how to set aside money for him if she dies and leaves him. And she has dementia too. So is that the kind of special needs you're talking about?
Yeah, so most of the special needs planning that I do is for families that have children or other loved ones who have a disability like autism or intellectual disability or whatever, to allow them to leave money to their child or their loved one, and not disqualify their child from public benefits. So if they're getting like SSI or Medicaid. And so it's really, really important planning. And it's important to go to an attorney who knows how to do it. And so I do that as well as I do guardianships for kids when they turn 18, because when you turn 18, you're a full adult. But if you have autism or something, you're not able to make responsible decisions for yourself. You have to go to court. Well, the parents have to go to court so that they can be appointed guardian for their own children, so they can make decisions
The
for
other
them.
thing I wanted to ask about was guardianships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all plan to have our full mental capacity until we die on our
don't.
deathbed, but sometimes you have to identify somebody, especially if you have a stroke or something, maybe.
Yeah.
Identify somebody they may have to, along with dementia, that
Yeah.
they may have to get guardianship. And some people fight having guardianship.
Yeah.
So I don't know how guardianships relate to the living trust or any of that
Yeah.
other stuff.
Yeah, so I would say with a lot of the incapacity planning we're doing, it's to try to avoid the need to get a guardian appointed. I say probate's easy in Texas. That's like what happens after you pass away. But guardianship is not easy in Texas. In fact, it's a very long process, and I think very difficult for families, especially if there's conflict, if someone is contesting the guardianship. So I really think through the planning, right, through having a medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, perhaps a revocable living trust, you're able to, in many cases, avoid the need to have a guardian appointed because you've already made these decisions about who you want to make decisions. Of course, it doesn't always work. Sometimes if you get dementia, right, you're compliant. Sometimes you're not compliant. And so it can be challenging, right? People want to stay in control for as long as possible. But a lot of the planning we do is to try to avoid guardianship when we can.
Can you just tell the difference between medical power of attorney and
Yeah.
financial power of attorney? Because they're two
Sure.
different things.
Yeah, two different things. Yeah. So these are both incapacity documents. A medical power of attorney is where you're naming someone to make medical decisions for you in the event a doctor says you can't make those decisions for yourself. And here you want to name, right, a primary agent and backups. Very important. Financial power of attorney, this is where you're naming an agent, someone to make financial decisions for you, and it's basically adding somebody onto your accounts, right? Think about it that way, but it's basically adding someone who can make financial decisions for you. You can say that document is either effective as soon as you sign it, or only in the future if you become incapacitated. I almost always recommend having it be effective immediately, because one of the biggest problems with the financial power of attorney document is that banks don't like to accept it. And so really trying to do anything you can do to make it so that they're not going to fight accepting it, I think is helpful. But also, I think if you don't trust somebody now while you have capacity, you probably shouldn't trust them in the future when you don't have capacity. And so really naming people that you trust is the most important thing on that financial power of attorney document. It doesn't mean like you need to give it to your kids right now. Really what you need to do is tell them where it is. But I think naming people that you trust and again, having backups on that document. But yeah, so those are sort of the two main incapacity documents in addition to the revocable trust, which works a little bit better than the financial power of attorney, because with the revocable trust, the way incapacity planning works there is that you're naming a successor trustee, and then you're saying how you are going to be removed as a trustee. So if you become incapacitated, it removes you from being able to make financial decisions, whereas that financial power of attorney, it's adding somebody, but it's not removing you. So if you're making really bad decisions, really the revocable trust works better, and you don't know, again, what's going to happen when you're incapacitated.
You may want to say, how do you determine, this is something as an APS worker we struggle with.
How do you determine someone's incapacitated?
Try to
Yeah.
find somebody to make that, especially someone who is fighting it.
Yeah.
That can be a challenge.
It definitely can be a challenge, and there's sort of three situations where we deal with this. So with the revocable trust, you say how you want it to be determined. You can say it's two doctors. You can say it's your doctor and a spouse. You can say it's like a panel. A lot of times we include something called an incapacity panel. So this might be your spouse and your adult children or whoever you want on there. And basically if they all think that you're incapacitated, that's what removes you. Yeah, exactly. Trying to make sure they're not all going to fight. But I think that's a really good way, right? Because you are telling your family, this is how I want it to be done. With the financial power of attorney document, it usually says a doctor certifies that you're incapacitated. It can be challenging to get a doctor to certify someone's incapacitated because they're hesitant to do that. But that's what usually is what it says for the financial power of attorney if you make it effective on incapacity. I usually try to remove that altogether by just saying it's effective immediately. And then for guardianship, if we end up going to court and having a judge declare someone incapacitated, we're usually relying on a document called the Physician's Certificate of Medical Examination, or I think they now changed it to the Healthcare Provider's Certificate of Medical Examination. And this is a document that a doctor or another licensed professional completes. Maybe. They've changed who can do it, and I don't know. I know in the end of the day, a doctor still has to sign off on all of them. But yeah, that's like a certification that then the judge looks at, and that's the main piece of evidence in a guardianship case, although sometimes we have to bring in experts and it's a whole deal. I don't do all the contested guardianship cases though, so I'm not the expert on that.
Okay. On the, trust and the big thing I think is to review it every couple of years.
Yeah.
Because like some of the accounts change and whatever, but the other thing is for actual possessions.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple paintings, maybe some jewelry, so if you just say, okay, my daughter gets this piece of jewelry, my grandson gets this, is that good enough, or do you have, I have to have it, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, we have trust and everything, all those things, but it's not, that wasn't included in there.
I'm so glad you asked about this, because this is actually really, really important. This is what kids fight about when their parents pass away. It's the stuff in the house. And it's, a lot of it, I think, is the grieving process, because it's tangible and you can see it. Yeah. And so I think talking to your family, number one, about what is sentimental to them is super important. And then writing it down. So a lot of times when we do a will or trust, we include something called a personal property memorandum, where you can handwrite on there if there's items that you want to designate for one of your kids or grandkids or other family members, whoever, and that is a really good way to do it. If it's something that you know they're going to fight about, it's the wedding ring, it's the expensive piece of art, let's put it in the document. Let's not leave room for them to fight over it. But I find for most families, having that list come pre-done, or even, sometimes we'll have people where they have their kids go around the house and put stickers on things. I think that's great. Or just talking to them, you're going to do a lottery system. But also, I think having someone at the end of the day who's like the person who gets to make the final decision, and that's usually the trustee or the executor at the end of the day gets to make those final decisions.
Does that list have to be part of the trust itself, or is it can be, I have an envelope, say, open this envelope, it's got all the bank account numbers, the passwords, the things
I think it depends on your family. I think usually having the list is sufficient. Most families I work with, that's sufficient. But like I had one family where they were fighting and fighting, and I ended up having in my office like these giant bags of stuffed animal bunnies, because that's what their sister collected, and they were fighting over the bunnies. And it was grief, right? It wasn't really that there was any value in these bunnies. They probably each could have had a bunny and it would have been fine. But it was that grief that they were feeling, right? Yeah. And so I think it depends. And we knew this, they knew that the siblings didn't get along, and they didn't write out who was going to get what. But I think usually writing it out, if your family gets along, is good. If you know what's when they're going to fight about, put it in the document. And again, having those conversations with your family. That's where having conversation is really, really important.
Yeah. Corey.
Just real quick, thank you for speaking on this. Yeah. Kind of related to the last question you just answered, do you have any words of advice for those families that are in conflict because they didn't have anything in place?
I think it's hard, right? So I try to really, as the attorney, right, working with these families, I try to remind them, is this really what's important? Is this worth the relationship with your sibling? And I try to really kind of be I know what the law says, but is it really worth it for your family? And kind of talking to them about it that way. As the attorney, it's easier for me as the outside person as opposed to somebody who's in that family conflict. But again, I think really you have to have that time to reflect and to step back and think, is it worth it? I mean, I see lots of families where they are just torn apart for the rest of their lives over the administration of a parent's estate, and it's heartbreaking to see that. And I think it's a reminder for all of you, right? There's things that you can do now to hopefully prevent that, and I think a lot of it is having conversations ahead of time. But yeah, it's really hard. I don't know if I have any specific.
It seems really important the way that you framed it as this is about grief, because it's easy for us to look at that and think, what, bunnies, stuffed bunnies, that's, or even money, like, oh, these are selfish people who. But really, it's something else. It's about relationships. It's about memories.
Yeah.
It's about all of that, and these are complicated. Like as you said, like that build, continue to have the conversations now, build the relationships now, so that when that point comes, it's easier to say, is this really what you want to be?
So
What you
as
wanna
a
be doing.
follow-up to her question,
We'll
If-
make this our last one.
if you
We'll
know,
up.
sorry, did you want to ask something?
No.
Okay, if you anticipate that there's animosity going to be, and you want to maybe, you choose maybe an executor to be an arbitrator instead of putting your kids in charge?
That's a really great question. And so when we're talking about who is in charge after someone passes away, right? It's usually we're talking about either an executor or a trustee. And you can name an adult child in that role. I definitely do not recommend naming co-trustees. Don't put your children in that role where they could be fighting. That's where my colleagues that do litigation, that's where they see a lot of the litigation cases. But you can also put in something called a corporate trustee or an independent trustee. This is someone that's not in your family. It's maybe from a big trust company or bank or a small trust company. But they're kind of an outside party, right, that can help with deciding, right, how things are going to be divided, with working individually with the different siblings if you know that there's going to be conflict between them. And I think it can be a really, really good way to help maintain those sibling relationships while still getting the estate administered at the end of the day. And sometimes when I see there's a lot of conflict in a family, I will advise my client, like, hey, why don't we get a third party in here to be doing this and let you two deal with your grief and your family, and we'll have a third party come in and deal with the financial stuff.
A lot of wisdom.
You do have to pay them a fee, but a lot of times you'll pay your family a fee too, to be very honest. But yes, usually a fee. The bigger problem I see with the corporate trustees is that they will only accept estates that are a certain size. So they won't do smaller estates. Usually they want to see $500,000, $1 million that they're administering. And so that's usually where we see really the biggest problem with having them be a good fit. But
I have a question, hopefully a real quick answer.
okay.
So if you have a child and you don't want that child to actually have the ability to have the capital at the end, you just want to have them receive maybe a monthly sum, and you never want them to touch the capital.
Yeah.
Is that better for a will or better for a trust?
So again, a will and a trust, they both deal with the same stuff after you die. So they both can have provisions for setting up really it's like a testamentary trust for a child. I still usually find the trust option is better just because we have to have a lot more language in there, and probating a really long will is challenging. But either.
Liz, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing your wisdom with us. And I also want to say thank you to you all for the energy and honestly courage that you brought to all of these conversations to talk about how dying faithfully is part of living faithfully, so thank you for the way that you have engaged in these conversations. And let's see, to close, why don't we, do y'all know the 23rd Psalm? Got that in your brain? Let's say that as a prayer together. And the normal version, the one that I'll lead us in, is the King James Version. That's the familiar one, the beautiful language there. Which also, I believe, is, although it's not the one in our prayer book, in the regular Psalms, it is in the burial service, because that's often the one that people request. So
He said that last week.
What's that?
He talked about that last week.
Is that right? All right. So that checks out with the priest. Okay. We'll make this our closing prayer then. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Thank you, Ruth.